Eli Carson had lived high in the mountains for so long that the people in the nearby town often forgot he was still around. His cabin, built from thick logs he had cut and shaped with his own hands, sat beside a quiet stream where the water stayed cold even in summer. The mountains around him were tall and steady, guarding him like old friends. Eli had once loved the peaceful life, but as the years passed, the quiet began to feel heavier than before. He had not always lived alone. When he was younger, he had a small but loving family parents who taught him the ways of the land and a younger sister who used to follow him everywhere. Life had been simple then, but one winter, a long time ago, illness had spread through their home. Even though Eli did all he could, he lost them within the same cold month. After that, the mountains became his refuge. They were the only place where the silence felt comforting rather than painful. He built a cabin, started trapping and hunting for his food, and learned to survive each season with patience. At first, the lonely life suited him. He liked waking up to the sound of birds, gathering firewood, and walking along old animal paths that few people ever saw. The mountains were beautiful in their own tough way. They did not demand anything from him except respect. Eli found a type of peace in that. But over time, the silence began to feel different. In the early years, he thought of his family every day. As the seasons passed, their faces started to feel farther away, like memories hiding behind thick fog. He still loved the mountains. But now, when the wind blew hard around the cabin and the nights grew long, he sometimes wished there was another voice beside his own. He tried not to think too much about it. When he went to town twice a year for supplies, he spoke politely to the shopkeepers and nodded to old acquaintances, but he never stayed long. He always told himself he preferred the mountain air to the noise of people talking in the streets. Part of him still believed that. But he also noticed the warmth he felt when someone greeted him by name. It reminded him he was not made to be completely alone. One spring afternoon, after a winter that felt colder than the ones before, Eli packed his mule and decided to make a trip into town earlier than usual. Something had been tugging at him, maybe the need for a new axe handle or maybe the quiet longing for human company. As he walked down the mountain trail, he found himself wondering what life might look like if he shared it with someone again. He shook the thought away, telling himself it was foolish. Who would choose the life he lived? The mountains were beautiful, but they were not easy. They required strength, patience, and a heart willing to endure long days and simple comforts. When Eli reached the town, many people were preparing for the end of spring. Farmers were fixing their wagons, women were carrying baskets of early vegetables, and children were chasing one another through the square. Eli watched them all with a calm smile. Life here was busy, full of chatter and small troubles. It was different from his quiet home, but enjoyable in its own way. As he walked toward the general store, he noticed a wooden sign outside a small office across the street. It belonged to a local matchmaker, someone who helped men and women find partners, especially in places where people were spread far apart. Frontier towns often depended on such arrangements, as many women from crowded cities hoped for a fresh start out west, while men living in remote areas wished for companionship. Eli had seen the sign before but never felt the need to step inside. He told himself he was content with his solitary life. But that afternoon, something made him pause. The windows of the office were open, and he could hear the gentle rustle of papers as the matchmaker sorted through letters. There was something comforting in the sound. It reminded him that people everywhere were searching for someone to share their lives with. It made his earlier thoughts return. Perhaps he wanted that too. He stood there for a few minutes, pretending to look at a wagon wheel nearby while he gathered his courage. Walking into the matchmaker's office felt like admitting he was lonely. For a man who survived winters alone on a mountain, that admission felt strangely difficult. But the feeling in his chest, soft, hopeful, and a little nervous, was stronger than his pride. Finally, he stepped toward the office. When he entered, the matchmaker looked up from her desk and smiled warmly. She was a small woman with silver hair pulled back into a tidy bun and eyes that seemed to understand more than people said aloud. "Well now," she said gently. "I haven't seen you in here before, Mr. Carson." Eli cleared his throat, feeling slightly embarrassed. "No, ma'am. I usually keep to myself. There's no harm in looking," the woman replied, her voice kind. "Many honest men come seeking companionship. It doesn't make them weak. It makes them human." Her words relaxed him. He stepped closer to the desk and nodded. "I suppose I've been thinking about it more lately." The matchmaker began showing him a small stack of letters and profiles women from different towns who wished for a new life, each with her own story. Some wanted to escape crowded city streets. Others longed for a quieter life where they could build a home and grow a garden. Eli read through them carefully, appreciating their honesty. As he read, the matchmaker set aside one paper. She hesitated for a moment before handing it to him. "This one is different," she said softly. "She was supposed to marry another man last month, but the arrangement fell apart. It wasn't her fault. The groom changed his mind at the last moment, and she faced a great deal of embarrassment." Eli frowned slightly. "That seems unfair." "It was," the matchmaker agreed. "She has asked for privacy during her next arrangement. If she agrees to try again, she prefers to keep her face covered until she reaches her new home. Not because anything is wrong with her, only because she doesn't want people whispering behind her back." Eli felt a slow, protective warmth in his chest. He had known the pain of being judged unfairly. He understood how heavy, silent shame could feel. He looked down at the paper, with the woman's name, Mara Dalton. Her description spoke of kindness, patience, and a strong will to start anew. Without fully realizing it, he felt drawn to her story. Something about her desire for dignity, as she started over, felt familiar. He knew what it meant to wish for a fresh beginning, though his reasons were different. The matchmaker watched him quietly. "If you choose to pursue this arrangement," she said, "know that she has been hurt. She needs gentleness and respect. I can offer that," Eli said softly, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. The matchmaker nodded, pleased. "Then perhaps this is the right path for both of you." As Eli stepped out of the office with the papers in hand, the town suddenly felt different. The sounds of children laughing and the smell of warm bread from the bakery seemed brighter somehow. For the first time in many years, he felt a new kind of hope, something warm and unfamiliar stirring in his chest. He hadn't expected it when he woke up that morning, but now he couldn't ignore it. He took a deep breath and looked toward the mountains. His cabin waited for him there, standing quiet among the pines. He imagined what it would feel like to bring someone home with him, someone who wanted a fresh start just as much as he did. Eli did not know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, he was willing to hope again. Mara Dalton had grown up in a small town where everyone knew one another, where every small action became a story by the end of the day. She was used to people talking, but she had never expected her own life to become the center of so many whispers. For most of her life, she had been known as the kind young woman who helped her neighbors, cared for her mother after her father passed, and worked at the little bakery on the town's corner. She lived a quiet life and never caused trouble for anyone. When she became engaged for the first time, the whole town celebrated. Her fiancé, Thomas, was a friendly man from a respectable family. His parents approved, her mother approved, and everyone believed the match was a good one. Mara, herself, felt hopeful. She imagined a life where she and Thomas would build a simple home, share responsibilities, and maybe one day start a family. It was not a dream filled with great adventure, but it was stable, warm, and peaceful, everything she thought she needed. She spent months preparing for her wedding day. She sewed the lace on her dress by hand, arranged flowers with her friends, and wrote her vows late at night with a smile on her face. She believed she was stepping into a new chapter of life, one where she could finally rest after many years of carrying responsibilities for her family. But that dream broke in the most unexpected way. On the morning of the wedding, her fiancé's mother came to her home with a tight expression on her face. She explained, in soft but firm words, that Thomas had changed his mind. No full explanation, no chance to ask questions, just a heartbreaking message delivered through someone else. Thomas did not come to speak to her himself. He didn't stand at her door to offer comfort or honesty. He simply stepped away from the promise he had made to her. Mara stood there silently as her dress hung in the corner, half-buttoned, her hands trembling with disbelief. The news spread quickly. By sunset, she became the subject of conversation in every home. The reasons people imagined were unkind. Some said she must have done something wrong. Others whispered that Thomas must have seen something in her that made him reconsider. None of it was true. But the truth mattered less than the stories people chose to believe. Her mother comforted her in quiet ways, offering warm tea and soft words. But even she could not protect Mara from the heavy feeling that settled in her chest. It wasn't only the broken engagement that hurt. It was the humiliation, the rumors, and the sense that her future had suddenly shrunk into a narrow space, with no clear path forward. For weeks, Mara avoided leaving the house. She didn't want to see the looks of pity or hear the whispers behind her back. She tried to stay busy by cleaning, baking, and helping her mother. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the way her dream had collapsed in a single morning. The town she grew up in no longer felt safe. Every street held a memory, and every store window reflected back a sadness she didn't want to feel anymore. One afternoon, her mother sat beside her at the kitchen table and gently mentioned the possibility of a fresh start. She had heard about matchmakers who helped women travel west to begin new lives in small, developing towns. Many women made the journey for various reasons. Some wanted adventure, some wanted a quieter life, and some wanted to leave behind painful memories. At first, Mara resisted the idea. Leaving her home felt frightening, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized staying would only keep her trapped in the shadow of her past. She wanted new air, new sights, and a place where no one knew about her broken engagement. A place where she could start again, without judgment. After much thought, she agreed to meet with the local matchmaker. The woman welcomed her kindly, listened to her with patience, and promised to help her find a respectful arrangement in the western settlements. The matchmaker explained that many honorable men lived alone in remote areas and wished for companionship, just as many women wished for a life away from crowded towns. Mara did not want to be afraid of new beginnings. She wanted to feel strong again, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. She filled out the paperwork, wrote a personal letter stating her skills and hopes, and trusted the matchmaker to find a good match for her. Still, she worried about how people might react to her leaving. She didn't want more attention, more whispers, or more pity. When the matchmaker informed her that a man named Eli Carson wished to meet her and was willing to give her the quiet life she sought, Mara felt a flutter of curiosity. She had never met him, had never even heard of him, but the matchmaker spoke highly of his character. She described him as honest, patient, and hardworking, someone who lived a calm, steady life, far from gossip and noise. Even with this reassurance, Mara made one special request. She asked that when she traveled to meet Eli, she be allowed to cover her face. Not because she feared rejection based on her appearance, but because she didn't want strangers recognizing her or judging her before she had a chance to start fresh. She wanted privacy, a small chance to arrive without the weight of her past following her. The matchmaker understood without judgment. She promised that Mara could arrive with a cloth or sack over her head if it would help her feel safe. A new beginning should feel like yours, she told her, and Mara held on to those words. The day of departure arrived sooner than Mara expected. She stood outside her home with her small travel bag in hand. her mother holding back tears, but smiling with pride. Mara wore a simple dress and carried her belongings in a sturdy satchel. A soft, loose burlap sack rested beside her, the one she planned to use for privacy during her journey. Saying goodbye was harder than she expected. Mara hugged her mother for a long time, breathing in the familiar scent of flower and lavender that always clung to her. Her mother whispered words of encouragement, reminding her that she deserved kindness and happiness wherever she went. Mara held those words close as she climbed into the carriage. Once the journey began, she placed the sack gently over her head, leaving enough space for air and comfort, but covering her features completely. The coachman didn't question her choice. He simply guided the horses along the dusty road, while Mara sat quietly inside, listening to the rhythmic clatter of wheels on the ground. She felt nervous, but also strangely relieved. Behind the sack, she did not need to worry about curious eyes or unwanted remarks. She could rest in her own thoughts. The trip was long, stretching over several days. She stopped at small inns along the way, always keeping her face covered when she stepped out. Some people stared, but most were too busy with their own lives to pay her much attention. Mara reminded herself that soon she would be far from all the places that held painful memories. She allowed herself to breathe deeply, imagining the clean air of the mountains she had heard so much about. When the carriage finally reached the frontier settlement, she felt her heart beating fast. The air smelled different here. Fresh, crisp, and full of pine. The people in the town square looked busy yet peaceful. They glanced at her with curiosity, whispering softly, wondering who she might be. A woman covering her face was unusual, and people liked to imagine stories. But Mara stayed calm. She had expected this. She kept her head low and her hands steady, reminding herself that this was only the beginning. The matchmaker greeted her warmly, guiding her toward a quiet corner of the square. "He'll be here any moment," she said softly. "Eli Carson is a good man. I think you will find comfort in his presence." Mara nodded, her breath trembling slightly beneath the sack. She felt the weight of her journey behind her and the uncertainty of her future ahead. She wondered what Eli would be like, whether he would speak gently, whether he would be patient with her story, whether he would understand the need for privacy. Just then, she heard footsteps approaching. Steady, calm, confident. The matchmaker's voice brightened. "Ah, there he is." Mara kept her head lowered, her fingers curling nervously around her bag. She sensed warmth and quiet strength in the way Eli stood near her. Though she could not see his face yet, something in his presence felt safe, steady, and sincere. For the first time in a long while, Mara felt a hint of hope. A small light in a world that had felt dim for far too long. Eli stood quietly in front of Mara, unsure of what to say at first. He had expected to feel nervous when meeting her, but instead, a calmness washed over him. There was something about her presence, soft, polite, and patient, that made him feel at ease. Even though he could not see her face beneath the cloth sack, he sensed her kindness in the way she held herself and the gentle way she breathed. It reminded him of the quiet mornings in the mountains, peaceful and steady. The matchmaker introduced them, speaking with the same warm tone she had used earlier. Mara answered with a soft greeting, her voice steady but carrying a hint of shyness. Eli found her voice comforting, and it made him smile without thinking. He wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make her feel safe, but the right words didn't come right away. Instead, he simply said, "It's good to meet you," in his calm, steady voice. Mara nodded, grateful for the simplicity of his words. She had imagined this moment over and over during her journey, worried that their first meeting might feel overwhelming. But his voice sounded honest, and that honesty soothed her more than he knew. The matchmaker explained the details of the marriage contract, a standard agreement used by many people in towns like theirs. It was not rushed or complicated. Both Eli and Mara listened carefully, each taking the commitment seriously. They were two people who had endured difficulties, and neither wanted to make decisions lightly. When it came time to sign the agreement, Mara hesitated for a brief moment. Her hands trembled slightly under the sack, but Eli noticed. He looked toward her with concern, but did not rush her. Instead, he gave her a small, respectful space to breathe. She appreciated that. It reminded her that she was not being pushed into anything. She was choosing this path on her own. After taking a quiet breath, she signed her name. Eli followed, pressing his signature in strong but gentle strokes. With that, their marriage arrangement became official. The matchmaker offered them her blessing and stepped away, leaving the two of them alone for the first time. Mara felt her heart flutter inside her chest. She wasn't frightened, but she felt the weight of the change settling over her. She was standing beside a man she barely knew, yet they were now connected by a promise. She wondered what kind of husband he would be. She wondered what kind of wife she would become. And she wondered how long it would take for the mountain life to feel like home. Eli sensed her uncertainty and took a small step closer. Not too close, but enough to let her know she wasn't alone. "The ride up the mountain isn't too hard," he said softly. "We can take it slow, rest if you need to. There's no rush." His considerate tone eased some of her tension. She nodded again and carefully lifted her travel bag. Eli offered to carry it for her, and she allowed him to. She didn't want to appear helpless, but she also appreciated his kindness. The two walked toward his mule, which stood patiently tied near the edge of town. People around them watched with mild curiosity, though no one said anything unkind. Their whispers were soft, wondering who Mara was and why she hid her face. But Eli paid no attention to them. He focused only on Mara, making sure she didn't feel pressured or uncomfortable. Once they started walking along the trail leading toward the mountains, the noise of the town faded behind them. The path stretched out in front of them, lined with tall pines and patches of bright green grass. Birds sang from the branches above, and the afternoon air felt fresh and clean. It was a peaceful route, and Eli hoped it would help Mara relax. For a while, they walked in silence. Eli didn't want to push her to talk, and Mara was grateful for the quiet. She listened to the rhythmic steps of the mule, the gentle crunch of dirt beneath their boots, and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was a calming environment, very different from the noisy streets of her hometown. Eventually, Eli spoke in a gentle voice. "If there's anything you want to ask me, you can. And if you don't feel like talking, that's all right too." Mara took a moment before responding. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate that." She wanted to talk, but she needed a little time to gather her thoughts. After a few more steps, she asked, "Have you lived in the mountains for long?" "Most of my life," Eli answered honestly. "They feel like home to me. I know the trails, the weather, the seasons. It's a simple life, but it's steady. I hope you won't find it too lonely." Mara heard the sincerity in his voice. "I don't mind quiet places," she said softly. "Sometimes quiet is the only thing that feels gentle." Eli glanced toward her, pleased by her answer. He had worried that mountain life might feel too isolated for her, but her words made him feel hopeful. "There's a beauty up there you won't find in towns," he explained. "Sunrises that spill light over the hills, evening breezes that smell of pine, skies so wide they make you forget every worry." Mara smiled beneath the sack. She liked the way he described things. His voice carried warmth, and it painted pictures in her mind that felt peaceful. "It sounds lovely," she said. They continued their climb, and slowly, the silence between them became comfortable rather than awkward. Mara asked about the cabin, and Eli described it modestly. A sturdy place built with his own hands, with a small porch that overlooked the valley. He explained how he stored food for winter, how he kept the fire burning during cold nights, and how he cared for his mule, Maple, who had been with him for many years. In return, Mara shared small pieces of her past, not the painful parts, but the gentle ones. She told him about the little bakery where she worked, how she loved the smell of fresh bread in the morning, and how she enjoyed tending to her mother's small garden. She spoke about the plants she grew, the herbs she learned to use, and the flowers she liked best. Eli listened carefully. He admired how thoughtfully she spoke and how her voice softened when she mentioned things she loved. Her words brought warmth to their journey, and he found himself wishing he could see the expressions beneath her hidden face. Not because he doubted her beauty, but because he wanted to understand her feelings more fully. As the trail grew steeper, Eli slowed their pace. "We can rest for a bit if you'd like," he offered. Mara nodded. She didn't want to inconvenience him, but she was grateful for the break. They sat on a large rock beside the path, with the valley stretching out below them. Even though she couldn't see the view clearly through the sack, she felt the fresh breeze against her cheeks and heard the distant humming of insects in the grass. It was peaceful. Eli gave her a canteen of water and waited patiently as she drank. He didn't rush her, didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words. He simply sat nearby, taking in the scenery and allowing her space to breathe. When they began walking again, Mara felt slightly more relaxed. She wasn't used to someone being so patient with her. She had spent years living under expectations, judgments, and unspoken pressure. Eli's quiet steadiness felt new, unexpected, yet deeply comforting. As afternoon turned to early evening, they approached the upper part of the trail. The trees grew taller, the air cooler, and the sounds softer. The world around them seemed to slow down. Mara found herself enjoying the journey, despite her earlier fears. She glanced toward Eli, even though he couldn't see her eyes behind the sack. She hoped he could sense her gratitude. "Thank you for being patient with me," she said softly. Eli looked toward her with gentle surprise. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "You deserve kindness. And I'm glad you're here." Those words touched her more deeply than he realized. After everything she had gone through, hearing someone say they were glad for her presence felt like a small miracle. As they reached the ridge that overlooked his homestead, Eli pointed toward the cabin below. "We're almost home," he said warmly. Mara followed his gesture, even though her view was limited, and felt a quiet sense of anticipation. Her heart thumped softly, not in fear, but in hope. This was the beginning of a new life, one she had chosen with courage. And as she walked beside Eli, she felt, for the first time in a long while, that she might truly belong somewhere again. Evening light fell softly across the mountains by the time Eli and Mara reached the small clearing where his cabin stood. The sky was painted in warm colors, soft oranges, pale pinks, and hints of lavender drifting across the horizon. The cabin looked peaceful in the fading glow, a sturdy little home with smoke curling gently from its chimney. Mara paused for a moment, feeling the cool mountain air wrap around her like a quiet welcome. Eli noticed her hesitation and spoke gently. "This is home," he said. "It may not be grand, but it's warm, safe, and it's yours too now, if you'll have it." His words touched her more deeply than he expected. No one had offered her a true home since her life turned upside down. She felt a soft warmth bloom in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. She nodded slowly, her voice quiet beneath the sack. "It looks peaceful." "It is," Eli replied, smiling. "Peaceful is good." They walked toward the porch, the wooden boards creaking softly beneath their steps. The mountains behind them felt large and watchful, like old guardians standing silently in the background. Mara felt small beneath their shadows, but not in a frightening way. Instead, she felt as if the mountains themselves were offering her a kind of protection, a fresh beginning surrounded by nature that asked for nothing but honesty. Mara stopped just before the cabin door. She could hear her heart beating softly inside her chest. each beat reminding her of the moment she knew would come. She had traveled far with her face covered, shielding herself from whispers, judgment, and curious eyes. But now she stood at the threshold of the place she would live, her new home, her new life, her new partnership. She knew the time had come to remove the sack. She took a slow, deep breath. Eli noticed her stillness and stepped back just a little, to give her room. "You can take your time," he said softly. "There's no pressure. You're safe here." Hearing those words helped her gather her courage. Her fingers reached for the edge of the sack. She held it for a moment, feeling the texture beneath her hands, remembering why she wore it. She was not hiding because she was ashamed of her appearance she never had been, but because she wanted to protect her heart from people who judged too quickly. But Eli did not feel like someone who would judge her. His calm, patient nature during their journey told her he was different. Still, she felt a small flutter in her stomach as she slowly lifted the sack off her head and let it fall gently into her hands. Eli saw her face for the first time. For a few seconds, there was silence, soft, warm, and filled with wonder. The evening light touched her cheeks, revealing the soft lines of her features. She was beautiful, not in a loud or attention-seeking way, but in a gentle, natural way that felt comforting to look at. Her eyes held depth, carrying stories of hurt and hope, and her expression showed both fear and bravery at the same time. Eli felt his breath catch slightly, not because he was shocked, but because he had not expected such honest beauty. Beauty shaped by kindness, resilience, and a quiet strength. He had imagined scars or sadness etched deeply onto her face because of how the matchmaker had spoken about her past. But what he saw was someone who had endured pain and still carried softness in her eyes. Mara noticed the way he paused, and her heart tightened for a moment. She wasn't sure how he was reacting. She lowered her gaze, her voice trembling softly. "I understand if you're surprised." Eli shook his head gently, his voice warm with sincerity. "No, not surprised. Just grateful." He took a soft breath. You're lovely." Mara's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected such a kind response. Her former fiancé had never spoken to her with such gentle admiration. She felt warmth rise through her chest, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "You don't have to say that if you don't mean it," she whispered. "I wouldn't say it unless it was true," Eli replied. His tone carried quiet honesty, the same honesty he had shown since they met. Mara looked up at him, studying his expression carefully. She saw no judgment, no hesitation, no doubt. Instead, she saw a steady warmth, the same warmth he had shown on their journey, now softened by the fading light around them. She felt her shoulders relax, releasing a tension she had been carrying since the morning of her broken engagement. For the first time, she smiled. It was small, uncertain, but real. Eli's heart warmed at the sight. Her smile was gentle, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long winter. "Would you like to come inside?" he asked softly. "You must be tired from the journey." "Thanks for mine. Furs." Mara nodded. She stepped forward as he opened the door for her. The inside of the cabin glowed with soft lamplight. It was simple but cozy, a sturdy table, 2 chairs, a small kitchen space, shelves with jars of herbs and supplies, and a fireplace that already held glowing coals, filling the room with warmth. Mara walked in slowly, her eyes adjusting to the soft light. She touched the wooden table gently with her fingertips. Everything felt genuine, crafted with care. She imagined the long, hard-working hours Eli must have spent building this home piece by piece. It made her admire him even more. Eli watched her quietly, giving her space to explore. Her eyes moved over the cabin, not with judgment, but with curiosity, as though she wanted to understand the life she was stepping into. "It's not fancy," Eli said quietly, "but I've tried my best to make it comfortable. It feels warm," Mara replied. "And Honest. I like it. Eli felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. He wanted her to feel at home, and hearing those words filled him with quiet joy. Mara walked toward the fireplace and knelt slightly to warm her hands. The gentle heat felt soothing after the long journey. Eli stepped toward the kitchen area and poured warm water into 2 cups. I made tea earlier, he said, offering her a cup. I didn't know when we'd arrive, but I thought you might like something warm. Mara accepted it gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the cup. The warmth seeped into her hands, relaxing her muscles. She took a small sip, and the soft herbal flavor tasted comforting and familiar. For a few moments, they simply sat near the fire, sipping tea in quiet companionship. The silence felt peaceful, not uncomfortable. It felt like the beginning of something patient, something steady. After a while, Mara spoke softly. Eli looked at her with soft eyes. "You've been through a lot," he replied. "You deserve gentleness. Ride. You have crease." Mara's eyes glistened slightly at his words. She wasn't crying, but she felt something inside her shift, something that had been locked away for too long. She felt seen, understood, and respected. She took a slow breath and whispered, "I hope I can be someone you are happy to share your life with." Eli nodded, a soft smile on his lips. "We'll figure things out together," he said. "One day at a time. There's no rush." She smiled again, this time a little brighter. The warmth in the cabin wrapped around her like a soft blanket, easing the fear she had carried for so long. Later, Eli showed her the small room where she could rest, giving her space to settle in. He didn't push for conversation or answers. He simply made sure she knew she was welcome, safe, and free to take her time. As Mara lay down that night, listening to the quiet sounds of the mountain breeze outside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of hope, not a loud or overwhelming hope, but a gentle one, like a soft flame that refused to fade. And Eli, sitting quietly near the fire, felt the same. He looked toward the closed door of her room with a grateful heart. Their lives were just beginning to connect, and he already felt the warmth of a future that might be filled with understanding, trust, and newfound joy. Both of them drifted to sleep with quiet hearts, knowing this was only the beginning of a story that had the potential to heal old wounds and build something beautiful in a place where silence had once felt empty. Morning arrived slowly in the mountains, with soft sunlight slipping through the small window of Mara's room. She blinked awake, unfamiliar with the peaceful silence surrounding her. There were no loud town noises, no footsteps outside, no whispered comments drifting through streets, only the steady sound of the wind brushing through pine branches. For a moment, she lay still, letting the calm sink in. This was her new life now, and the quiet felt like a kind of comfort she had longed for. She rose from the bed and smoothed the blanket before stepping out into the main room. She found Eli already awake, sitting at the table with a cup of warm tea. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and a gentle smile spread across his face. It wasn't a forced smile, or one meant to impress. It was simple, sincere, and filled with quiet welcome. "Morning," he said softly. "Did you sleep well?" Mara nodded, returning the smile. "Better than I expected. The quiet here, it feels peaceful." "I'm glad," Eli replied. "It takes time to get used to mountain mornings, but once you do, they become something to look forward to." He offered her a cup of tea, and she accepted it gratefully. As she sipped, a warm feeling spread through her chest. It felt good to start the day with something simple, yet comforting. They sat together in silence for a few moments, not because they lacked words, but because the quiet felt natural. After breakfast, Eli showed Mara around the cabin property. Behind the cabin was a small shed where he kept tools and firewood. A little path led to a stream where clear water rushed gently over smooth stones. The air smelled fresh, filled with pine and earth. Mara felt her shoulders relax with each step, the stress of her old life slowly melting away. "This is where I gather water," Eli explained, pointing to the stream. "And over there is a little patch of land I've been planning to turn into a garden." Mara followed his gaze. The soil looked rich, the land wide enough to grow vegetables and herbs. She imagined planting rows of beans, carrots, and flowers that would bring color to the mountainside. Her heart warmed at the thought. "I could help with that," she said softly. Eli smiled, pleased. "I'd like that. A garden would feel more complete with someone who knows how to care for it." They spent the next few hours exploring the area. Eli showed her the trail that led deeper into the forest, the tall trees that shaded the path, and the hidden spots where wild berries grew in summer. Mara listened attentively, her interest growing with each new place he revealed. She felt herself slowly falling into the rhythm of the mountain life, a rhythm she had never known, yet felt strangely connected to. Over the next several days, they settled into a gentle routine. Eli chopped wood in the mornings, while Mara prepared simple meals or organized the cabin. Sometimes they worked side by side in comfortable silence. Other times they talked quietly, letting conversations drift naturally. Mara learned more about Eli's past, not all at once, but in small pieces he offered with trust. She listened with patience, grateful that he felt safe enough to share. In return, Mara began opening up too. She spoke of her mother, her old town, and the bakery where she once worked. She told him about her favorite flowers and the books she used to read. She didn't speak much about her broken engagement, but Eli never pushed. He let her choose when to speak, and that freedom made it easier for her to heal. One afternoon, while they were gathering herbs near the stream, Mara noticed Eli watching her with a thoughtful expression. She looked up, with mild curiosity. "What is it?" she asked gently. Eli shook his head lightly and smiled. "It's just, you look peaceful here, like the mountains suit you." Mara felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "I wasn't sure I would fit in," she admitted. "But the quiet, and your kindness, they make it easier." Eli glanced toward the trees, as if gathering his thoughts. "You bring something good to this place, too," he said softly. "Before you came, the cabin was quiet. But it wasn't warm. Now, it feels different." Mara's heart fluttered at his words. She had never imagined she would bring warmth to someone else's world, especially after feeling so unwanted before. But Eli's sincerity wrapped around her like a soft blanket. She smiled shyly and continued picking herbs, her heart lighter than before. As weeks passed, they began working together on the little garden behind the cabin. Mara planted seeds with careful hands, teaching Eli how to space them and how deep to bury each one. They watered the soil, pulled weeds, and watched as tiny green sprouts slowly peeked through the dirt. Eli marveled at the way she cared for the plants, as if each one mattered deeply to her. "You have a gentle touch," he said one afternoon as she carefully handled a new sprout. Mara looked at him with a soft smile. "Plants grow better when you treat them like something important." Eli nodded thoughtfully. His words lingered with her long after the sun set that day. Life in the mountains continued with simple joys. They shared meals by the fire, laughed quietly at little things, and spent evenings telling stories of childhood memories, funny moments, lessons learned, and dreams they never expected to share with anyone. Eli told her about the fox that once stole his boots, and Mara shared the story of the time she accidentally sold bread with too much salt, and the whole bakery laughed about it for days. Their connection grew slowly but warmly, like a flame that never flickered harshly, but glowed with steady strength. There was no rush, no pressure, just a gentle unfolding of trust and companionship. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed with deep orange and rose colors, spreading light across the valley. Mara rested her hands on her lap, feeling completely at ease. "This place feels like home," she said softly, almost surprised by her own words. Eli turned to look at her, his eyes warm. For a few moments, they sat quietly, listening to the soft songs of evening birds. Then Mara spoke again, her voice gentle, but certain. "I never imagined I'd feel safe again, or that someone would see me kindly." She turned toward him with sincerity in her eyes. "You changed that for me. Actor. Minus looted he 7 time with people. Also ever one. I never people 7 times 7 times 7 time." Eli felt something tender bloom inside him. He reached out, but not abruptly, just enough to rest his hand near hers. "You deserve to feel safe," he said softly, "and I'm grateful you're here. Truly." Their hands slowly found each other, fingertips brushing lightly before settling comfortably together. It was a simple gesture, quiet and warm, but it held more meaning than any words they could speak. From that day forward, things felt even easier between them. The garden grew stronger, the cabin became livelier, and their bond deepened with each shared moment. They weren't just two strangers brought together by circumstance anymore. They were partners slowly building a life filled with trust, respect, and gentle affection. Months later, people in the nearby town began to hear about Eli and Mara, the mountain couple who lived peacefully together, always welcoming, always kind. Their story spread quietly, not as a tale of a rejected bride, but as a story of two hearts that found calm and comfort in each other. And whenever Mara thought back to the beginning, the sack over her head, the long journey, the fear she carried, she felt grateful for every step that led her to this place. A place where the mountains stood tall, the streams whispered softly, and Eli's steady presence made her feel more valued than she had ever felt before. Their life together grew slowly, patiently, beautifully. Not rushed, not perfect, but real. A life healed by kindness, strengthened by understanding, and brightened by gentle hope. And as the seasons changed across the mountains, Eli and Mara continued walking their new path side by side, grateful for the unexpected beginning that brought them home to each other.